Welcome back, guys. Today I have somebody on the show who I'm so proud and excited to be speaking to, and more importantly, for the audience to learn what I've learned, hopefully in the past 5 years of working with this man in, let's say, a 45-minute period, or compress as much of that knowledge as we can into that period. But
no pressure then.
I have gained a ton of experience. There's no need to sell anything here. This is all, I'm always 100% truthful. I've learned so much from this man. I'm forever indebted to this man. I am the person I am in my career and in my profession today because of Marcus. I'm going to hand it over to you, Marcus. Get a bit soft with this, but who are you? What do you do? And why should anybody stay on this show for the next hour to listen to what you have to say? You are a LinkedIn player. Well, no, you're
that whole thing is just devalued.
Still to this day, I'm kind of finding where my what kind of pain did that create for you and your business?
Essentially, I've spent the last 35 years paying stupidity taxes. So I finally worked out how to monetize it by finding other people who are either in the throes of or suffering the after effects of having paid those stupidity taxes and don't want to keep paying them. And the history has a nasty habit of repeating itself, because as a species, we don't generally learn very well from history, because we tend to be very focused on what's present and available to us, as opposed to what the patterns are showing. And our brains evolved in an environment where almost everything was stronger, faster, meaner and sharper than us. Many things were trying to kill us, including our own species. So we didn't really trust anyone. And we often had to make decisions rapidly with limited information, and it was often life or death.
Mm-hmm.
Our brains haven't really moved on from that. And if you don't start with that premise, because the only channel that exists when it comes to buying and selling and debt collection or managing and leading is the human brain. Everything else are just media. And we need to understand how the brain works, especially in times of crisis. We are in a process that if you look around you, I think it's not unreasonable to suggest there is something of an unraveling happening on a global basis. So this means rapid, forced, unwanted, uncertain change. Is that an accurate depiction?
100%. 100%.
Now, what we know from neuroscience, from behavioral science, from behavioral psychology, from the work on heuristics, is that the brain has a tendency to make shortcuts. And these shortcuts were very helpful surviving in the savannah 250,000 years ago. But in a world of disaster capitalism, in an extraction mode, as the world unravels around us and the global world order, the financial world order, our wealth last 2 weeks, 10% of it was just wiped out because of a decision that was beyond our control. I've spent 35 years saving, and 10% was wiped out in 2 weeks. Now, I could be upset about it.
Okay.
But history has taught me that those with a prepared mind, who have practiced for those difficult, struggling moments, can respond well instead of react badly. Now, that's what this episode is about. And that's how I use AI to help me make those choices and get out of the way. Because if I trigger any sense of threat, uncertainty, or risk, your brain will associate me with that emotion. Now, if that's the last emotion I leave you with, or it is the peak emotion I leave you with, when I come back, how do you think your brain unconsciously will receive me?
Panic mode, fight or flight.
There you go. So I believe in the philosophy of being intelligently lazy by design. How do I get the most bang for my effort, spending the least amount of money? Because my wife tells me off for describing her thus, but she is a penny pinching tight ass, and thank God she is, because I'm a spendthrift. And together we make some halfway human, decent human being and business person, because her constraint means that we actually have capital to work with, instead of it being frittered away on really terrible decisions. And most people are using AI at the moment in order to amplify what they're already familiar with doing, which means that they're effectively amplifying what didn't work in the past very well, but because it was a numbers game and there was plenty of capital and there was plenty of room for maneuver and money was free, you could get away with it.
Yeah.
But now the context has changed. Tell me this, Shane. Imagine you are sat in the Portco boardroom of a private equity portfolio company, and the conversations that were going on last week between you and the private equity associates, between the private equity associates and the GPs and the LPs, and all those people who took on way too much debt when money was free.
Yeah.
And now it costs a lot and they can't afford it. And now, after Liz Truss put us back to 1970 in terms of our spending power in the UK, and we've had another 10% drop since then. Yay!
I love what you've done there. I love what you've done there. I love it's anybody who knows Marcus is very familiar with your level of intelligence and how you put things together. My first discovery of Marcus was when I first started my business, and we'll get into how to manage risk and how to amplify great behaviors and how to amplify stupid behaviors and how AI kind of links to both.
How not to amplify. The first thing you do, well, but so just so we've got a marker in the sand.
Yeah.
The first thing you do is you define the outcome that you want and how you want to accomplish it. The second thing you do is you establish what is not working and you stop doing that stupid thing. Mm-hmm. Do not let your attachment and habit and tradition, and this is the way we've always done it, get in the way of the outcome, because that's what you're after. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at anything else, you're looking at the wrong end of the problem, and you have created an obstacle for yourself later. Mm-hmm. So that's the line in the sand, which we can build on from there. Sorry, go on.
So, Marcus, if it's all right with you, this is how I would love to share a little bit about my experience with you, and then how the audience can gain massive value in what's happening today. And I think also principled selling, how to actually sell properly, how to understand a buyer. And I think this is one of the things I'm coming up against right now in our process, in our, let's just say, in the timeline of our business. We started this business back in September of 2023. We found a market in the agency world, which was where I spent most of my time. That fell flat on its face. We were blindsided by laws, regulations, and compliance that you cannot do this. The entire business model had to kind of be turned on its head, a complete 180. Let's say actually a complete 90-degree change. So we had to pivot. And again, I was prepared for these pivots because of some of the things I've learned from you. And that transitioned us into the debt collection space, building out a market by understanding my buyer very well. I'll touch on this as the first point. Understanding how to take a prospect through a journey, jobs to be done. I just had a podcast with a managing partner of Freeze on Capital yesterday, who's speaking to me about some guy Christensen, who
Clay
had actually,
Christensen.
yeah, the guy who actually invented jobs to be done. And I was like, holy crap, I'm speaking to a managing partner. This is the first conversation with a VC, and I know what this guy's talking about because of the stuff I've learned from you. So I'm going to backtrack very quickly to 2020. I don't know if you remember this conversation. I was starting my business. I had no idea what to do. You taught me this a while after, but vulnerability. I went out to a bunch of people and I said, yo, basically, I'm starting a business. I have no idea what to do. I've seen you. Would you mind giving me a piece of advice? And my first conversation with you was, what are you doing? Why do you want to do it? The regular questions you have. And I said, I've bought this system for data and I'm emailing a bunch of people. And he said, so effectively, you're pissing off about 6,000 people, right? I was just like, I never thought about that. I actually never thought about that. And the first book you told me to read was by Mark Schaefer, Marketing Rebellion. And because I was a typical seller who just worked on features and benefits and highlight commercials and bullet points, I had no idea about understanding the buyer, cultural behaviors. That was the first thing that you told me. Go and read Marketing Rebellion by Mark Schaefer. Go read Eat Your Lunch. Go read a book by Anthony Irene. I was like, what is this guy talking about? But those were my foundations to build on. And in the first 2-3 weeks, you remember these names? Agenor, Flowforma, and who is the other one? Elanders. In the first 2 to 3 weeks of my business, I had generated my first £30,000 as a first-time business owner. And it was because I knew my first steps in the market. And then again, we started to work together and you helped me understand through multiple whiteboard sessions that I still have today in this room, how to go through everything. So if the best place to start for me is understanding your buyer. Okay, understanding your buyer. A lot of people that I work with right now, whether it's consumers, whether it's the debt collection agencies, the utility companies that I'm working with, understanding how they work has been challenging for, let's say, some of the leaders that started in this space, in this business, and even for me. Why do you think it's so important to understand psychographical traits, deeper traits about your profiles that you're engaging with, so that you can have a proper buyer's journey to make them a customer?
Well, for the simple reason that it's not you selling to them. It's your brain creating the conditions where their brain feels safe moving forward. And moving forward must feel safer than staying stuck or going backwards, or the alternatives to you. Now, you can talk about psychographics and all of that sort of stuff, but frankly, most people will go running scared and not really know what the hell that means. The reality is human beings engage with human beings who are in the us group. Okay, so I'm going to give you two formulae that essentially describe everything that you need to know about selling. The first one is vulnerability times uncertainty equals perceived risk.
I love that formula. I still have it.
And that goes credit to Daryl Stickle. And it's a genius formula because if their brain perceives, whether real or not, any risk, any uncertainty, any threat coming from you, your intent, your product, your service, your syntax, your modus operandi, how you communicate, what you say, when you say it, the timing of your messaging, the content of your messaging at a specific time, if that stuff isn't aligned with where they are, you will create dis-ease, dissonance, discomfort, and that will create uncertainty. Now, buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, because what you have just done is created anticipatory buyer's remorse.
I remember these words.
Okay? You have, because the brain doesn't differentiate between imagination or memory when it recalls it. It just treats it as the same. So if you've created a peak end experience or a peak middle emotional experience, that is the peak thing that they remember and they hold on to for the next touch, they will associate that feeling and you, and they will put those two things together as threat and uncertainty. The neuroscience tells us that the brain's default setting, the standard setting for all brains of all shapes, colors, creeds, genders, is where there is uncertainty and we hit our threshold, we go to the worst case scenario. So not only do we anticipate buyer's remorse and imagine it in graphic detail, but we feel it in our gut, in our heart, and in our head. And we look at ourselves failing publicly and being humiliated and the fear of all of that insecurity. Now, tell me something. Can you see any circumstance where that will serve you in the outcome that you want, which is the collection of a debt, without resistance?
Massive resistance, huge amount of resistance. And that's typically where, as you've always told me, that's where deals go to die.
Right. Well, why not just ask a better question? And the better question is this. What if the process is the problem? And if the process fails to empower the human operator, i.e. the DCA, to turn up and have a human-to-human conversation where grown-ups are in the room instead of parent and adult and kids fighting and, I'll show you mine if you show me yours, and how bloody right are you, and I know my rights and you can, and all that sort of stuff. Why not just prevent all of that from happening in the first place? Because the only people who want that are psychopaths and sociopaths and bullies who should not be in the industry. They
Absolutely.
are, obviously. But tell me this. What if you were the DCA that people would come to because they trust them with their debt? They would rather you collected it than anybody else. Because the reputation damage, the harm, the human damage, the fallout, the ripple effect is non-existent with you. Whereas with everyone else, it's de facto standard and just part of the cost of doing business. There's always some fallout. I posit that that is bullshit.
I agree.
In this unraveling, the question we should be asking is this. How do we thrive through this, achieve all of our quotas, crush it, without being a monster, without being complicit, without being crushed, and without turning into one of them? Because no one wants, you've got to ask yourself the question. If I go home at night and I speak to my kids, how do I want them to perceive me if I told them what I really do all day?
Well, you want them to be proud of you. You want them to respect you. But if they saw the other side, I think they'd maybe raise an eyebrow.
Well, we're creating the future for our kids. I'm going to be dead soon. I'm rapidly approaching 60. Well, no, the reality is I've maybe got 10, 20, 30 years left. That's nothing. Trust me. The last 50, however many years, has gone in the blink of an eye. So I'm looking at the very, very steep, sharp slope down. And it's your generation that has to pick up the pieces, and it's your kids that are going to have to live with the consequences. Now, I think it's fair to say that reason and discourse has become quite lowbrow and divisive. Well, I think we've got one mission. How do we empower people to make good decisions well that they won't regret?
Look, anybody can throw a very easy, quick, from the hip answer, use AI in a better way. But I think a lot of it comes down to, again, your values. A
Yeah.
lot of it comes down to your values. And again, the ability to modify, enhance, improve those values as you learn from people that are more experienced, to remove your ego and take that, like, that asshole attitude out of the way, and be somewhat, even with do not disturb, still get so many calls, and you become vulnerable, and you actually be a human, and you talk to people just with that little bit of a softer side, just being a little bit more open. And the amount of kind of, what's the word, receptiveness,
Mhm.
how open people are to you when you actually are a people person and you humanize yourself,
So
it makes all the
you've
difference.
you've distilled it down to the one word, which is intent. Is your intent to serve yourself first or serve them first? It's as simple as that. If you show up with the intent to serve the outcome that they are hiring, I mean, these people didn't want to go into debt. They did. I mean, there are maybe 2% that are inveterate cheats and liars. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
But most of them are at the low end of the income bracket with poor credit rating, and therefore fell into the trap of high interest, onerous debt, which then accrued more interest and got passed on and passed on and passed on. And
Mm-hmm.
they lived through this chain of terror. So they've
It's
learned
horrible.
to hide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael Sheen did that fantastic exercise where he bought £1 million worth of debt with £100,000 worth of his money, and he wrote it off.
Oh my God. That's insane.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Now, what if some of these debt collection agencies looked at the low end of the spectrum and the ones who are never going to get out of debt?
Yeah.
And instead of, because there is so much margin in this. If you're buying it, I used to work with a private equity firm that was in this space, and they bought a load of debt off Arrow and all of those sorts of people.
Mm-hmm.
So it was big money. And the lack of compassion was the problem. But you're buying debt at 10p in the pound or threepence in the pound. It's really distressed debt. So there is plenty of margin in there. So
Mm-hmm.
you could maybe reduce the payment dramatically and get some people to pay up front. You just get your cash back, and you make 300% out of the gate by making it easy for people not to resist. And use the AI in a way that doesn't batter your ego. One of the things I tend to get quite prickly at criticism because I'm a bloke, and around the age of 8 or 9, I was conditioned to be quite terrified by the Christian Brothers. And so what I found really powerful with AI is be my board of constructive detractors.
Okay.
Leave no stone unturned and tell me exactly why I am wrong. I go looking for evidence that I'm wrong, and the AI tells me dispassionately. My favorite one on that is the final one, which is report back as an alien anthropologist. Because that's an
Writing that one down.
perspective. Yeah.
So I want to speak to you about this part on the debt collection. I had no idea, Marcus, that you knew this much about debt collection and how the actual space works. I've been on the receiving end of that. And again, as somebody, another thing you taught me very well is, like, how can lazy people do really well? If you can be lazy and find a way to do things a lot faster and a lot better, I find a way to do an 8-hour day in 2 hours. And I'm not joking. This is because I learned how to leverage the right systems, the right behaviors. And again, I have a know-how. I have a map now of massive failures that allow me to pick out of 100 failures. I know the one thing that works well, right? And being on the receiving end of having to pay debt and having to owe debt, it can happen from anything, whether you lose a job, whether you go through a separation, somebody dies, bereavement, anything can actually force you to go into debt. Bad decisions that can force you into going into debt. And yes, as a consumer that receives those calls from the 0330 number, your 01482 number, they're not from London, they're not an 0207 and an 0208. I'm declining that. They'll ring your doorbell after it gets too escalated. Turn your doorbell off. Now they can't ring you. There's always ways around it to stop it. Obviously, it amounts and becomes a bigger problem, even though you're kicking it down the road. But yes, you're right. As a consumer, as someone on the receiving end of that, dealing with debt is horrible. And that's what we thought was going to be the game changer. I'd love to hear your critique on this. We were in the space where we had to pivot from AI SDR to debt collection bot. And GDPR was a massive factor in this, right? It was a massive piece that said, without consent, you can't call these people. You can't call people and book meetings. There's too much nuance to a meeting, right? There's too much nuance to that prospecting call in your first 7 seconds of trust, however you want to place it or break it down. It's too complicated. But if you have opt-in and Bank of America or Barclays Bank has a debt where you owe $5,000 on a credit card and they pass it over to Zinc Group or whoever the debt collection agency is, Zinc Group now has your details. They now have consent and they can call you after emails, texts, whatever, and say, hey, Shane, you owe this much to your Barclays card. Can you make it now? No. Can you make it in 3 payments? Yes, we'll send you a link. Very easy workflow. And if that doesn't happen, then that pass over to an agent as step 3 is your final escalation. And then the humanized approach of building a relationship, managing that debt is where we don't want to eradicate the human. Our biggest focus is humanizing the process, making it easier to have a bot speak to you about a delicate issue where a human on the other side, there's no judgment, there's no resentment. Why are you calling me about a debt that isn't usually, you don't understand my situation? But if a bot can recognize and identify emotional cues, empathetic cues, ways of modifying tonality and addressing those pains with the right intelligence before and having a calm conversation, the receptiveness to speak to that bot is higher than if hi, this is Joe. I'm calling about a debt that you have with this. I'm hanging up, right? And I think that's where we think that process can be optimized and we can become that company where consumers are happy to speak and resolve their debt. And one of the biggest initiatives that led this or is driving this is something called, have you heard of the PSR initiative, Priority Service Register Initiative?
I have heard of it. I don't know what it means.
Essentially what it is it's a database of consumers, 18 million UK citizens, where 20% has been enrolled. And that 20% of people that has been enrolled, I might be wrong on these numbers, so don't quote me on this, but let's just say it's around that number. That number of people have a situation in their home where your electricity cannot be turned off, your gas cannot be turned off, your water cannot be turned off.
Yeah.
You are in a vulnerable situation where you need to have considerations taken into effect before, let's just say, they stop your utility supply. And we're working against that, with that initiative with a number of organizations to gather data, put people who are vulnerable on this database. So when the utility companies call and address somebody's late payment or outstanding bill, they have significant information to say this person is in a situation, you might need to approach this in a different way, or you might need to give this person 30, 60, 90 days of breathing space.
Right. Well, again, I think the human operator needs to be empowered to perform well in the moment. The technology on its own, I don't believe is enough. And this is where I think so many organizations get it horrifically wrong. Because what they're trying to do is optimize for cost saving. They're not trying to optimize for the best outcome for the human beings on both sides. So as a result, they'll go for the cheaper option rather than training the agents on how to behave. They'll outsource it to a bot rather than using the bot to empower the human to make a good decision in the moment, human to human, because it's a lot cheaper to do it that way. And this is where Einstein makes the point rather well, which is you cannot solve a problem from the same position that created it. When you do that, all you do is you amplify the flaws that already exist. I've spent the last 4 years modeling how trust ripples or drifts through an organization mathematically so that you can actually measure the impact on revenue, on alpha, on EBITDA, on NRR, on CAC, on conversion rates, on where the drop-off is in your process, so that you can architect that out and you can test it before you waste a whole heap of time, effort, and resource and money. And then you can use your legacy data in order to refine it even further, because you've got all of that stuff. I mean, how many people in sales, for example, have over the last 5 years blown hundreds of perfectly viable opportunities because they were crap? Right. Or because they tried to sell when they weren't ready to buy because they were in a passive looking stage. And so they wrote them off, and then they bought more data. And I remember those conversations with you from Sales Driven.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of money you threw away on pointless data, chasing endless no's, instead of precisely targeting exactly the right people.
You save a ton of time. A ton of time.
Well, what if you can create with AI and a bit of upfront effort a journey that touches your customer or your debtor where they are, and it sends them the message they need to receive at that moment to lower resistance, not put fear in them, and for them to gently be nudged and to open their eyes to a safe way to pay off their debt and a safe way to engage with the debt collector.
That makes me, it actually makes me feel a little bit more relaxed. I wish I had that. I really wish I had that type of situation, because I'm on, when it was the case, my back was up against the wall, and there were situations where it was just, you don't understand what I'm going through. Why am I having to go through this conversation with you?
Well, and not only that, but you're having to go through it over and over again,
with different reps
in series and in parallel, because you've got different debts, and you start out by juggling one credit card with the other, and the 0% transfers and all of that.
Yep.
And then you stop paying attention to your post, and you look for the brown envelopes, and you look for the red envelope. Okay. Right. Well, it's an obvious pattern of behavior. Well, why not just architect it out so none of that ever happens?
I think that's the next question. And it was something, again, another thing, start with the outcome first. The one thing you always said, I would say, I want $100 million business. Shane, why do you want such a headache? And I did, because I didn't know. You only know what you know. And it was, Shane, design the business that you want. Design your perfect business and work your way backwards. And everything I've done to a great standard has worked in that way. So if you're a debt collection operator or a CEO of a debt collection agency, and you come across this particular episode and you want to reverse engineer this process from the recovery and full payment of debt to you have a debt that needs to be paid, how would we architect the outcome first backwards for one of these individuals at a debt collection agency or in a utilities operational department? How to really architect and orchestrate this flow from the end to the first point?
Well, what's the outcome that you want? You want to have your
paid
covered.
Yeah.
Okay. So for that to happen, what are the conditions that need to exist?
You need to have the money.
Okay, so they need to have the money, and they need to be
willing to participate. Willing to participate.
So for those two conditions to exist, what needs to happen beforehand for that to be possible?
For them to be willing to participate, they have to be wanting to take look. I think it's, you have to want to take that call, or you have to want to make that call.
Well,
you have to want to address it.
Want their debt to be behind them. Yeah. So what's the better future that we need to architect for them? So
debt
that
free
at the end of it, because they want to be debt free without
Yeah.
this specter hanging over them and that constant stress.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And to
Yep.
move on with their life. Yeah.
Yep.
And
Yep.
you want to recover the debt so that you can buy some more.
Yeah. I didn't think about that next one. Yeah.
But again, the job to be done goes beyond that, which is what is the life you want your business to create for you, to facilitate.
I remember
So
that too.
selling is not about convincing. Selling is about facilitating buying. How do I facilitate the best decision for you so you get your needs met, and as a byproduct of that, I get my needs met too without any resistance and the least amount of cost or effort? I like those odds.
Of course.
Versus that miserable high stress where, you know, everyone is exhausted. The operators are operating in high pressure environments. Leaders are learning the hard way, and their egos have taken a hit. They've had to pivot hard. They come back wiser, but very wary and scar tissue all over them. Buyers and debtors are bracing themselves every angle. People expect harm. That's not a good place to be.
Waking up every morning and wondering if they've towed your car.
Or you're going to have someone kick your door in. Yeah. Or be served. Can you go out without being served some summons or something horrific?
Yeah.
So, you've got all of these systemic primings for failure, where the old DCA processes guarantee resistance. If you look at your processes, where do you find that your debtors resist, avoid, ghost, and run away?
Where?
Are those moments within your control to change?
Absolutely not.
What? Those moments where you touch them.
If I do, yeah, where we touch them at the right moments, yes, we have the ability to control them. But on the receiving end and how they feel and everything, I don't think we can control that.
Okay, but what do we control that is received and then reflected back?
How we communicate with them, how we approach the situation.
Even earlier than that?
What our plan, our roadmap is to get there, or to actually recover the debt in the first place.
Okay. That's still very supply side rather than demand side.
I'm lost. I think it's learning lesson.
In terms of jobs to be done, you have supply side, which is the traditional develop a product, which is debt, and go out and find people to sell it to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Or debt recovery and go out and find people to get it from. Or go out and look for where the demand is and then create product to suit.
Okay, I see what you're doing again. It's just like pipeline building. Are you going to focus your attention on a bunch of people that are not a fit and are a waste of time?
Ta-da.
It's that 60 to 70 again. It's been 2 years, Marcus. I need a refresher. It's that 60 to 70% of wasted time where you can delegate low level activities so you can focus on higher value tasks.
And my favorite bit is you start with cutting the fat, the fiction, and the friction out first, so you deliver clarity, certainty, and consistency, which gives confidence.
And you remove threat, uncertainty, and the perceived risk.
There you go. And you can do that because you control your process. You control the syntax in which things happen. You control what message goes out when, to whom, in what tone. All of that can be planned for if you can be bothered. But it takes effort. Now, you can put all the effort in, or you can come to someone like me who spent the last 4 years designing it, so you don't have to. That the whole point of architecting this stuff is so that we take out the human friction. But what we do is we create a feedback loop that means it's iterative. So every time you fail, it's not a failure in role, it's a feedback loop. The only crime is hiding your failure and not recording it.
Mm-hmm.
because that is willful fiduciary failure. If you are a CFO, you have a fiduciary responsibility to optimize the performance of the business and optimize for shareholder value. If you're a board member or a founder, you have to optimize. And that means what you need to do is when you find a problem, you don't tolerate it. What you do is you don't persecute the human being. You ask yourself the question, what is wrong with the process that prevents this human being from being able to execute to the standard we intend? The standard we intend is collecting the debt with the lowest cost, the least resistance, and the greatest speed without drop-off. And for those people to be happy to settle the debt. We might want to go even one step further, which is to identify within our book of debtors who is likely to fit that profile. So we focus our attention on them and we sell the other debt on.
So kind of categorizing with some sort of lead scoring activities or measurements, and then splitting a list of here's your 100, here's the 20 that will pay, they exhibit the right behaviors, here's the 80 that you are, and then you're saying that 80% that may not be good, even though you've purchased that book of debt, would you sell on that 80%? That's the 80%
it's
that you
up
want
to
to
you.
sell on.
You can create a process to then work out whether or not there is any of that fits into the category of recoverable. That in sales and marketing, you have the option of marketing to your TAM, your total addressable market, i.e. anyone with a pulse. Or attract only your hot ICP, your ideal customer profile. So if you are targeting your TAM, there is a natural cost of dead work that is created.
I'm going to share my screen while you speak about this, but I think I know where you're at. So just go.
If you are working cold inbounds, and this is 2018 data, so it's way out of date, exactly.
Yeah.
If you're working cold inbounds, warm inbounds, you're talking about 6 to 11 follow-up touches just to get through to the human being.
Yep.
If it's a cold outbound, it's 36 to 42 outbounds just to get through to the human being on your list, if they're still alive or even the list is still relevant.
Yep.
And that used to degrade at 4% a month. I suspect that's accelerated dramatically now.
Yep.
And it will get worse over the next 2 quarters. You then have 14 touches on first touch, typically across SaaS, to get one first meeting with someone on your list. And then on average, 7 out of 8 do not result in a second. Now, if you're following a whole bunch of those up to that first meeting that you cannot, will not, or should never close, you're in deep trouble.
Big trouble.
You've now created somewhere between 600 and 3,000 touch points for one rep to follow for one bad lead.
The compound effect of bad behaviors.
Yeah. So when I said you can't solve a problem from the same position that created it, well, what you actually do is you amplify what's bad and make it worse. And that's what we're seeing in Q4 of this year. Watch out for a whole bunch of private equity companies, portfolios, and their private equity companies themselves tanking. Because what they're going to do, and you're seeing it happen now, is they're doubling down on top of the funnel activity.
Mm-hmm.
They're increasing their hiring of SDRs and automation, or they're laying people off and trying to cut cost.
Yep.
Now, the net result of that is there is a trust drift, which you can measure precisely at the various stages of the buyer's journey. And you can engineer and architect that out. And you can tie it to the valuation. You can tie it to the revenue numbers and EBITDA and all of that, the stuff, the performance theatric metrics.
Mm-hmm.
and you can tie it directly to alpha, which means that you can unlock the alpha no one else can see, and you have about a 6-month window to fix things before you hit the tree or come off the cliff. Or you could just guess. I prefer.
All right. Look, those points are, again, a lot of heat needs to be taken on those, and you're raising a ton of good points, and again, some things that you're mentioning, I've not even thought or considered it, and it's just the awareness piece. You know what you know.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think is
After
really
this, it becomes willful ignorance.
it's very true. Another thing that I've always found to be so beneficial in my work with you, again, it's the buyer process from identifying an ICP. Closing a contract is where most people push their thinking, but if you push your thinking beyond closing the contract, then onboarding a customer, usually you have siloed groups, so you don't have to pay attention to this. But when you're running a whole agency and wearing all your hats, you need to know how that signed contract transitions into onboarding and how you actually make a customer successful. And you would think, well, most people, it seems to be, they think you close a deal and you pass it over to another team. I'm working with HubSpot right now, my most expensive subscription package to them, every single feature. It's the biggest nightmare of my life. I cannot wait to switch. I cannot wait to fire HubSpot as my supplier because their rented time is up. They are past due. Making customers so on that, you can jump on that, but making customers successful, the right way to make a customer successful in 2025, what's the first thing that people should be paying attention to?
Well, I would start with the end in mind. Pay attention to Covey's advice. Begin with the end in mind. But the end is not the transaction. It's not the first use. It's the third expansion sale and the third renewal. And work backwards from
yes.
That. Then it becomes interesting because you have a danger of getting a customer for life. When I teach people to prospect, we don't prospect for pipeline. We prospect for a customer for life who is a sovereign, equal partner where they have a job to be done, which we serve in helping them execute to the standard that they are expected to do so without stress, without confusion, and without being an obstacle. It's not our job to be the hero. Our job at best is to be the hero maker.
Or the guide. Another one you shared with me.
Well, again, you can get anything you want in life if you don't care who takes the credit.
Yep.
Be a credit giver, not a credit taker. That's your ego. If you are worried about the transaction, you are not focused on the customer's best interest. So you project malintent. You project threat, and their brain will pick up on that. And they will eventually, at some point, be triggered to see you as a threat. And that creates uncertainty and anticipated buyer's remorse. Engineer all of that out.
I'll give you a prime example. There's a situation I've been in recently, and it's about customer growth and how to grow accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say the 5x kind of 10x principle of growing your accounts. How do you make them successful? What was the first thing that I saw? A spreadsheet with a bunch of numbers with a 1.2% increase month on month. With month one, where customers haven't even been onboarded at full value. No anticipation of churn. No anticipation of guiding them through a success roadmap. No anticipation of when the first renewal is, the second renewal is, how to upsell. What are the kind of criteria that make this successful? And I feel a lot of, let's just say, people who, what worked then does not work now. What they've done in the past, they think it's going to be helpful to them in today's environment. Mm-hmm. And they put a spreadsheet of numbers together to anticipate growth and their future projections or their forecast. And I think they just completely obliterate the overall picture.
Well, they do, because it's lazy and it's 1980s and 1990s thinking where... Yeah. Without being overly pejorative, what happened in the 1990s was a bunch of mathematicians who couldn't be good physicists because they failed at theoretical maths. So they weren't good enough to be great physicists. So they then became mathematicians and quantum analysts and all of that kind of stuff for financial services and banks. Now, if you're only looking at the balance sheet, you are missing about 80 to 95% of the bigger picture. And you are looking through a very, very limited blinkered lens with one eye poked out and conjunctivitis. Human beings make decisions. Human beings buy, unless you're getting your bot to talk to my bot, which may well happen for commodity. But if it's an important decision, if it's a life-changing decision, if it's a decision that I could live to regret, I really don't want to make a bad decision. What I want to do is make a good decision well. Now, our role in sales is not to convince, it's to facilitate buying. It's to facilitate making the best decision for them on the terms, with the timing and the conditions that serve them now and serve them in the future. Because people don't want to make the right decision badly, so they then live to regret it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we create the conditions where they have cause to believe that might be the case, they will anticipate buyer's remorse and then they will ghost us, which is why so many people have a big, fat, constipated, bloated middle of the funnel.
I remember that too. Yep.
Yeah. And what happens is we need to, first of all, triage. The first thing we do is we triage the ICP to make sure that you're actually targeting the right people, not the wrong people. Because if you're targeting the wrong people, when we triage the pipeline, what we're going to find is about 85 to 95% of it is either misallocated and you don't really understand where the buyer is. So you're probably going to be blowing at least 60% of that. And 60% of all paid for generated pipeline that marketing generates, SDRs faff about with, AEs and agents follow up on, 60% ends up in closed lost, no decision. 52% of that is because the salesperson does not understand that when a buyer objects, their brain is telling you, I don't feel safe. And instead of receiving that and welcoming it for the catalyst that it is, and an opportunity for you to improve your process immediately,
they throw in a discount.
Instead, what we do is we try and handle it, or we panic and we discount. Absolutely. Yeah.
Or you scramble or push or try to throw in urgency, and
and
it's unnecessary.
You touched on another really important thing. never create or try to coerce, manipulate, or leverage false urgency, because their brains have got 3.5 million years or 3 billion years worth of evolutionary hardwiring to tell them something is wrong when you put them under pressure. In the same way that if someone tells you that you're the victim and some tiny minority is also the cause of your problem and they are powerless, you have to ask the question, why are they distracting me? Okay. And this is what happens in businesses when the salespeople are blamed or marketing is blamed instead of the process and the bad decision.
Yep.
Yeah?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Almost every one of these problems starts with a single point of failure, which is a bad process, which is a legacy or a hangover, or a bad decision or an ego.
Absolutely.
Well, all of that is within your agency to fix. When you've identified it, then you have sovereignty. You have the choice. That's what AI can liberate for you if you choose to learn how to use it well.
Marcus, as always, jam-packed with insights, information, intelligence, and look, a strategic advantage for those that are looking to improve their process from a prospecting standpoint, customer service, customer support, customer success, and even those little gray areas in the middle. We're at the top of the hour, and I think there's so much more that we can unpack. But with 5 minutes left to go, I'd love to hear from you a question you've always asked me. If you could go back 20 years ago to maybe if it's 30 years ago, sorry, who, another bloody call. What would you say to your 18-year-old self?
Well, before I do that, I just want to clarify something. What you've just described is what I do, but you kept it in silos. I help people join the dots between the silos so that you don't get the drop-off. Because if you can identify the drop-off points and where trust drifts, you can drive up your conversion rate. And within 90 days, you can have cash in the bank, and 120, you can be collecting on a flywheel. Now, that's really interesting. So back to my 18-year-old self. I tell them to not break the Jimmy Carr rule. I'll give the polite version, which is if you meet 3 arseholes by 12 o'clock, it's you. Look in the mirror. Get out of your own way. Stop being an egotistical twat. Stop trying to force things, convince people, try to control things. Understand where people are and meet them where they are, and learn to listen. Clearly today hasn't been a great example of that. My wife will give me a proper bollocking. But you listen your way into a sale, you talk your way out of them. Your questions and your ability to empathize matter more than any tactic or technique. And the moment you're looking for tactics and technique, you're trying to weaponize relationship, and that does not sit well with the brain. So above all else, learn about how human brains actually work. Learn about behavioral science, learn about neuroscience. Read Mark Goulston's book, Just Listen, an absolute must. Read Charlie Green's book, Trust-Based Selling. Read Bob Mester's book, Demand Side Sales. And pay attention to how people receive you. The 3 pillars that we teach people are self-mastery, because without self-mastery, you do not get self-awareness. You don't understand at an identity level who you are and who you are striving to be, which means that you cannot create a plan in order to create the conditions where you can become the person you're meant to be. And instead, you've just taken on a whole load of baggage that you inherited from family, school, friends, bosses, work, life, debt, and everything else. Well, let go of all of that baggage. You can choose to carry it, or you can choose to let it go and no longer let it define your future. And take time to reflect. And when things aren't going well, 99.99% of the time, look in the mirror and ask yourself, what did I say or do or fail to say or do? Or what did I think that the other person probably picked up on? And how was I the cause of this problem? And if you start with that, and you always go looking for people who can prove you wrong, go looking for evidence that you're wrong, go looking for people who can break your thesis, because what's left works. And you have to do next to no work.
Marcus, I think that's it. That's the pod. Thank you so much, as always.
Pleasure.
I think those are the lasting words. Look, if you want to elevate your game, if you want to become a better seller, if you want to understand, like truly, not at basic level, not at intermediate level, very advanced level thinking, pushing your thinking to new heights, being challenged, being critiqued, being told wrong, somebody who ain't going to hold back. Marcus is your guy. He's got over 212 recommendations on his LinkedIn. He's been in the business, Sander expert, 30 years of just helping loads of professionals and tons of reviews. Hit him up on his LinkedIn profile. Marcus, do you have a new website? Is there anything else that you're kind of check out his podcast? There's so much stuff. Where can people go to find out more about you?
Well, people come to me because they're interested in the execution. They're not interested in the theory. If you are, fine, I can definitely give you loads of that, and we can go down many a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But people come to me because they want to execute, and they want to execute well. And so LinkedIn is a great place to do it. You can phone me. That's on my LinkedIn profile. My email is on there. But I only take on maybe 2 clients per trimester.
Mm-hmm.
2 partners and 2 clients. That's my model. So I have a very stringent qualification process to protect both of us.
Yep.
Because no one spends the kind of money that they're going to spend with me and put the kind of effort that they're going to unless they're absolutely certain that they're going to get the result that they want. So check out the Inquisitor podcast with Marcus Cauchi. My LinkedIn profile, we're principled selling. My wife and I run that together. And we actually live the stuff that we teach. We take on no staff. Everything is done through partnerships, through alliances, through ecosystems, and through human propulsion systems that remove the resistance so people can buy safely. And it operates across the entire value chain. So it's not just sales and marketing. It's operations, it's product, it's procurement. If you think about it, procurement can affect sales dramatically. It definitely affects risk, continuity of supply. You know, all of those things matter in manufacturing. So we are agnostic in terms of the sector, but we look for very particular types of people. They want to succeed well. And what they want to do is be able to do their job excellently in 90 minutes a day. So they've got 6.5 hours to do what the hell they like.
I do it. I'm living proof. Marcus, thank you very much. I'll stop it right now and I'll be sharing this online.
Thank you.